How's it going, guys? It's Cole from See-Through Panel showing off Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done? Written by Harold Schechter, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Eric Powell on art. Published by Albatross in this nice hardcover. And retailing for $29.99 US. That's 30 bucks. But they can never just say that. Before we get too deep, I'm not going to be spoiling much. This is true crime with a little bit of creative flair, but on the whole, it is a well-researched, well-documented historical account of a serial killer. Well, we'll get into what he was. Of a horrible person that really existed named Ed Gein, and his life story, pretty much. It did come with this goofy dust jacket that's the exact same as the cover treatment. So if you're interested in the story but you haven't read it yet, I would say read the book because it's phenomenal, but you can get all of this information online as well, but it's just recreated so well and dramatically in this book that I think it's a far more enjoyable experience than, reading it online. But if you're afraid of spoilers, I'm not going to talk much about it, but I am going to flip through it a lot. And there's some really rough stuff in here, so I'm going to give a spoiler now. I'm going to be flipping through this thing arbitrarily and randomly, and there might be some bad stuff in here. There's no graphic sexual violence or anything super triggering of that nature, but there is some pretty messed up stuff. So if you're worried about that, I would just, look up what this guy did, and then if you're okay with seeing that depicted through visual storytelling, then maybe jump in. But it is pretty violent. Eric Powell, I know best from The Goon. I haven't read much of it. I always really liked his art style, but never have I read almost anything that he's drawn or written. Harold Schechter, I hope I'm saying that right. Not a name I am familiar with at all. But his job here was basically to organize facts and events, do a lot of research, create a few characters to help ease the narrative a little bit, make it flow smoothly. So as I said, there are some fictional characters in here and some people that are kind of conglomerations of real people. Like the reporters weren't real reporters, but they kind of are stand-in for all of the reporters to give character to that area of the story. There is, I assume, some conjecture, and a lot of the dialogue, I'm sure, isn't, you can't confirm that this stuff was said word for word, but I think it's played pretty well into the facts that we know are there, and it reinforces those facts, and I don't think that there's anything in here. It's not like anyone's going to defend Ed Gein, and even if for some reason, for historical sake, they wanted to, I think most of the liberties, the creative liberties that are taken here are for the sake of storytelling and narrative. So, Ed Gein, this book covers him from pretty much birth to death, the troubles with his family life, which are a lot of the book, and then his crimes, I'll just call them, his horrible, horrible crimes, gets into his mental state throughout his life, from when he was a kid to when he's an adult to when he dies. Because this is a very, old... I think he died sometime in the 60s. I could find that out. Yeah, I don't need to, because it'll spoil it for you. He died a while ago, so it's pretty common knowledge. It's not like a spoiler, considering its history. And what really engrossed me was the idea of getting inside the head of this person through a fictionalized, almost documentary style caricature of him, although it is very real. And also there's just a lot of lingering threads. This book doesn't try to answer, but it kind of asks you the questions that aren't ever answered, and no one will ever know the answers to, I don't think, about exactly what Ed Gein did. I'll tell you what he did do that is factual and for sure. He did kill 2 women. He did dig up a lot of bodies and, let's say, take parts off of the bodies and leave them around his house, made skin into furniture, made suits of human flesh, really horrific stuff that is horrifying because it was real. A lot of things I read in horror comics, and I wouldn't even characterize this as a horror comic, but a lot of the things I read in horror comics are much worse than that. Um, in the narrative, in the story, there are just some horrible, horrible things. Like, you could have, you know, unknowable, unthinkable things happen to people, but those things weren't real. When you're reading and seeing these things, and you know that these things did happen, and Ed Gein did do this, it is next level horrifying, but also extremely compelling. I ripped through this entire book super fast because I was just enthralled. And I've never been a true crime fan. I've never even really dipped a toe into it. But just based off this book, I feel like I would be pretty compelled by a lot of true crime out there because it's just such a different tone to a lot of the stuff I read. Like, this is a mixture of a crime book, obviously nonfiction, and a little bit of horror, I guess you could say, while also being a little bit biographical. But God, this page is difficult. Yeah, there's not much to be said about. I'm going to dance around a lot of the really bad stuff. But I'll show you the really bad stuff. Eric Powell, I assume, had a difficult time drawing some of this, but I know he's an extremely talented artist. I haven't talked much about the art. Facial expressions, panel structure, storytelling, visual pacing, just everything in this was perfect. I'm gonna get the Goon now and probably read it extremely quickly because there's a different style out of him too right there. Kind of throwback style. This was visually a delight, if that word can be applied to something as awful as this. He makes the scenes with the horrific things just make you cringe, make you sweat. The kind of like innocent scenes where it's how Ed Gein was brought up, and that, as you can probably assume, was a very troubling upbringing with a lot of problems. You almost feel bad for him at that point. And if you don't have a lot of research behind you, you don't even know the things he's going to do as an adult, so you do really feel bad for him. It's an awful way to live as a child. And, God, yeah, it's so compelling. The narrative, Harold Schechter did a fantastic job of pacing this thing in a way that is always leading you into the next phase of Ed Gein's life. I think that the facts are presented super well. He even brings you some appendixes at the end here, gives you a lot of the direct sources from the pages, exactly. An appendix of interviews, which is excerpts that he kind of used and borrowed into the narrative. And yeah, he pretty much says almost everything in here is 100% true. I didn't read the entirety of this. I need to finish it still. I just finished this book and immediately started recording because I was really enthralled by it and I wanted to capture that. But pretty much the only thing I can gather is there's a couple characters that are fictional just to help with the process of the story, and then the dialogue obviously being made up because there wasn't, cameras and recordings all the time whenever he was talking. But I think this is a genre. Being not knowledgeable about Eric Powell, I can't say exactly if this is true, but to me this feels like probably right up his alley in terms of tone and matching art to writing. This just works so perfectly. All of his characters look unique. He's very, very good at giving you only the details that are necessary in the panel. This is a page of all the messed up stuff in Ed Gein's house. I'll leave it there for a second, but I don't want to leave it there for too long. Really sketchy at times when things are in the background, but this panel specifically. Really nicely detailed foreground with him talking, and then the scene he's talking about in the background, real sketchy. Pretty clearly, I think, traditionally rendered, hand-drawn. I mean, I would have to assume it's just so... A lot of pencil, that looks like real pencil. But, so I think it's traditional. But, yeah, I'm kind of gushing about this. A lot of the stuff I want to talk about is just direct story stuff, and I don't want to ruin it for people, even though it is just you know, a true story. I enjoyed this a lot. I thought it was pretty much... Do I want to say... I think it might be the best book I've read this year. I think it's amazing. Super compelling, engrossing, disgusting, gorgeous. It's just gorgeous now that I'm just going back through it. There's Ed as a young man, young boy, and his mom. Yeah, so I don't want to go too deep on this. What it really did was make me go into a rabbit hole of reading like wiki entries of Ed Gein and all of his things, because there's answers, there's elements to the story that go unanswered, and clearly no one knows the answers. But I wanted more evidence and opinions and secondhand accounts and things like that to kind of drive home what I thought was the actual outcome that we don't know. Like his kill count could have been higher. We don't know. He 100% killed 2 women, but we don't know. We don't know the details on anything else. But this book was awesome. Really loved it. Don't know why dust jackets come with books. Don't get it. Yeah, if you have true crime recommendations for comics, keep it in comics, because that is my preferred, like, just medium to absorb any media in, to be honest. I read a lot of prose. I don't watch TV or a ton of movies. I just kind of read. So I prefer to keep it inside comics. But if you're into true crime, if you're into horror even, I'd say, or crime books, this is just incredible. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Peace.